welcome, welcome, welcome to Health Issues. I'm your host, Chris Sylvain, and we're thoroughly honored and excited about today's show. As we have throughout, we're talking about incarceration, and now we're actually going to look at it from a holistic standpoint, the concept of incarceration right here in New Orleans and the state of Louisiana. Obviously, it mirrors what's going on in the country, and believe me, we have probably, I can't think of a more informed guest on this particular subject, our retired judge, Calvin Johnson. Welcome, sir.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time to come stop by and talk about this subject of incarceration. But first, let's see if we can bring the viewers up to date. You've done a lot through your career. Like you said, you just mentioned 69 out of Southern University, but you law school at Loyola. But you've done a lot going all the way through. If you can kind of give us a little background.
Oh yeah, I born in the country. Actually 20 miles outside Baton Rouge is where I grew up at, right outside of Baton Rouge. Went to Southern in 64. Got out in January of 69. I went in the military after that. I was in the Air Force for 4 years. Got out in 73. Went to law school in 75 and got out in 78. I was at Loyola as a law professor for from 82 till 90. Ran for judge in 90 and was elected, and retired as a judge in 2008. And then went to this agency, a Metropolitan Human Service District, and did that for 6 years after retirement. And now I'm just doing anything that I feel like doing, like sitting here talking to you.
Well, I'm glad that we passed along your way. Freedom.
Yes, indeed, at last, I tell you.
Free at last. Well, that's good. But when we look at it, though, and looking at this concept of incarceration, you've been able to see it because 69 was an interesting year in New Orleans and in Louisiana, carrying us all the way through the 70s, which was a heyday for African Americans, I would think. Huh?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. When you look at that period of time, we get the death of Dr. King, the assassination of Dr. King, comes in that time period. All of what we think in terms of that civil rights movement, a lot of that struggle, and we talk about Selma, and we talk about Birmingham, and we talk about all of that. That comes in, and for me, it comes as a direct part of me in terms of my growing up in the South and being really part of that. In the criminal justice aspect of it comes for me in 63 when I get arrested in 63 in a civil rights demonstration, go to jail. I get prosecuted, I get convicted, I get placed on probation. That's in 64. Actually, when I get out of high school, I'm on probation when I get out of high school. And so from there, I've always been, I guess, in some ways, from high school, in some fashion, in that justice thing. The 70s, you really see though where we are heading in the country in terms of where we are today with mass incarceration, because you see really, if you look backwards to the 70s, you see the start of the kinds of things we did and now continue to do that adversely impact African Americans in terms of how they come and what happens when they come into the justice community. In 1970, the Orleans Parish prison had about 800 people in it in 1970. In 1970, we had, the city of New Orleans had about 525, 550 in terms of population, 550,000, and 800 people in jail. So if you think then, well, what happened? Well, what happened was we changed how we did the law, and we did it, arguably, specifically, we did it to deal with the consequences of integration. 10 years before 74, it's 64, and you see that we're in the middle of the civil rights struggle and integration, etc. We fast forward 10 years to 74, and now governmental entities and structures and states and all are dealing with the aftermath of civil rights, and the way they're dealing with it is to make tighter and tighter and more and harder for people who come into the justice system to keep them, to literally to keep them and to utilize that system as a way of dealing with black Americans, specifically black male Americans. And so if you think about it from that time, from that point in time forward, then we started doing things like we started multiple building. We started changing how we sentence people. When I started practicing law in 1979, you could be arrested in Louisiana for an armed robbery. But if you had a drug addiction, you could get probation for armed robbery as long as you went to a federally qualified or supported drug treatment program. So you could get probation. In 1979, 1980, you get probation for armed robbery. Today, of course, for an armed robbery today, the minimum mandatory sentence is 10 years. That's the minimum mandatory. Of course, sentences are a lot longer than that. But that's just how we changed. And again, the change came specifically, I suggest, in terms of how we dealt with with black males, is how the change came. And so you can track all of these changes in law going forward, each having as great a consequence or greater consequences as we go forward, to the point where at the time of Katrina in 2005, New Orleans, when we had about 418,000 people in the city of New Orleans living, we had 6,300 people in jail. So in 2005, we had what, I'm trying to do the math, 8 times right, as many people in jail in 2005 as we had in 1970. Right. We had 8 times as many, and a population that was about 150,000 less. And so those are direct consequences of decisions we made as regards to justice system and how we manipulated or changed the laws, and how we changed, also how we changed how we thought about not only the law, but people.
Well, okay, the history is solid. There's no way to argue that point. It is what it is and so forth. But you were able to watch it from the judge's bench in law school. Like you said, it started off even high school, but your viewpoint, you were actually able to see, could you see intent in philosophies though?
You could, when you look beneath surface and you say, well, why did these things change? Well, because we wanted a different result. That is, we wanted a different result in terms of outcome. Right. Because if those laws that were kind of laws had continued, we'd have had kind of outcomes. Right. So we changed them. Right. We had in the 80s, we had a law in Louisiana where you could come into court, you could come into the justice system charged with possession of drugs, mm-hmm, and you could plead, in essence, no contest, yeah, to the possession charge. Right. You wouldn't have a conviction on your record. You would serve a probationary term. You would get some consequences or some conditions. Right. You fulfill those conditions. You came back in. The case was, or the charge was automatically dismissed. Right. But there was never a finding of guilt. Now that statute was created specifically to deal with the consequences, a consequence that had happened to a Louisiana state senator's son, Nat Kiefer. Okay, Nat Kiefer's son gets busted for possession of cocaine. Mm-hmm. But so to keep Nat Kiefer's son from having the consequences of it, that statute, it was a revised statute 40:983. That statute was created to create that better result, right? Well, that better result in that statute not only would apply to Nat Kiefer's son, but everyone similarly situated. So by less than a decade after its passage, it no longer was on the books, right? Mm-hmm. Because those people similarly situated happened to be people of color. And so that result you had by that statute which was a much better way of treating individuals who came into the system with possession of drugs, it all went away. It just went away. And so you can track those kinds of changes throughout Louisiana and how the law has changed to where we are today and how we got to the result we have today.
Okay, so those in the legislature made decisions, and like you said, it's not difficult to see the intent of those decisions because there's no way to argue. I mean, it is what it is. So they made the decisions. So therefore, once the laws were on the books, the criminal justice system, the people, the players in it, the judges and DAs and everybody else like that, no matter how much they attempted to move it or shift it from Baton Rouge, it created a system like a rat wheel. Sure.
We always under the guise that the decisions we're making is to keep the public safe. That these are decisions that will enhance public safety. So always those kinds of laws and those kinds of changes and decisions were made under the cover of keeping us safe, and therefore to keep us safe, we need to enhance penalties. We need to make it such then that people can't easily go in and out of the system without a bad mark. We need to do things such that when they come into the criminal justice system, they are punished to the greatest extent possible. We need to do those things, and we're doing those things because this is how we will keep the public safe. What if you also look at this again from the laws, but the impact of it, and of course where crime is or was throughout all of this period, one of the things that comes clear is that never was a connection between harsh laws, that is, these laws that punish people to the greatest extent possible, and reductions in crime. There's never been there is no correlation whatsoever between our sentencing decisions and how we sentence people and how we incarcerate people and lower crime rates. There's absolutely no. In fact, there is a direct correlation between that creates just the opposite. That creates more crime because of how we sentence people.
But you could see the connection between the end of segregation and the beginning of mass incarceration.
Absolutely. See, absolutely. Absolutely. I think if we really look backwards and we started at a starting point, we can see what happened was segregation ended. And with the ending of segregation in the South, there had to then be other ways of dealing with that population. The other way became the law. That is how the other way came. You can go, if you go backwards, if you look at the decade or so following the Civil War, you have the same kinds of things happen in terms of the laws changing to deal with the newly freed population. We get these vagrancy laws. There was no such thing as a vagrancy law before the end of the Civil War and the Reconstruction. There was no such things as laws like that. Well, we created those laws then to deal with that freedmen, those freed people. Well, we did the same thing in the 70s to deal with the newly freed people, arguably.
1870s, 1970s.
Arguably, we did the same thing.
It's just a repeat all over again. Because now, even from your standpoint, coming out of slavery, the same thing. The difference between the whites who were advancing this brutality and those who were silent about it, and then the others who are advocates for equality and justice. Many times it was very difficult to see the differences between each group.
You know, there's always been, at least from where I am, I guess, and what I've seen, always been those three groups. Right. That is, and you could always, in some form, identify those three groups. Always, those who were as adamant in terms of suppressing African American people and doing all they could do to make their life as miserable as possible. Those who wasn't there, but was silent as regards to what that reality was, and then those who was actually trying to do things differently and make life better. But you can always see those. You could always see those. I saw them growing up. I did, and I truly remember. I truly remember them, and to this day I have white people that I grew up with in the South. Yeah. That I'm very friendly with, very friendly with, and these are people who at the very least, they did no harm, and in some instances they tried their best to do things that make life better, and that's a fact.
That's it, and that's it, because you know, there's great humanity in all races. I mean,
absolutely.
So absolutely. It's not a race that can never codify evil or good. It's not race, but. And it's good that you're able to see it, but it's almost the nature of white supremacy, for whatever reason. I got obviously effectiveness. It wears the sheets. It doesn't come out. Like I say, some are able to see it, but you know, it's like a shell game. It's trying to figure out where we're at.
You know, when sometimes, and I don't do this with any regularity at all, but every now and then I forget myself, and I will look at internet and these people who comment about articles. You read an article about something that has some kind of progressiveness to it. The most recent things, of course, is about the Confederate flag and the monuments and that kind of stuff. But then you read the comments, the internet comments about it, and these people then who can hide behind these created things and say the most vile, the most incredible things imaginable that they can put in writing and put out in the world in this ether for all of us to see. And you think, what kind of mentality is it that allows this? I mean, who are these people? And the sad thing is that they're all around us. See, that's the sad thing. They are actually all around us, and it really sometimes it brings for me real sadness to know that we have people who are as vicious, who are as vile as people who write some of those comments that you can read in the internet.
Well, I would say this, though, that the 70s, 80s, and particularly gave African Americans this hope that we were moving to a different place. But it seems as though the philosophies and the belief that we don't have the same intellectual skills, may be able to, you know, dance and sing pretty good, but the intellectual skills and planning and organizing, those that believe that it's just the natural order for us to be more animalistic, hadn't changed. The same thing that drove slavery, same thing that drove that those philosophies were just hidden through the 70s and 80s. Yeah,
I've always thought that I have pictures from the 60s that pictures that were taken in my hometown, right? And that you can Google and you can look up these pictures, and they're of demonstrations that happened in my hometown. And I look at the pictures, and I look at the people who are sometimes in the background of these pictures, which are young white people like me, who were at the time I was I was a teenager, 16, 17, 18, a teenager. Well, I'm looking at others similar to me, who were spitting, who were throwing, bricks or whatever, who were on horseback and riding over people, who were doing all these things. Well, just like I am not dead, neither are they. See, they're not dead either. And so for some of them, clearly they found God. They became better. They, for lack of a better word, repented, for lack of a better word. But obviously for some didn't. And not only didn't they, but they have made a point of teaching their children who use the internet the same kinds of things that they were taught in the middle 60s. So when we say then who are these people? They're the same people who was in my hometown, who was doing the things they did in the middle 60s. They are them, and they are their offspring. That's who they are.
So mass incarceration then in the criminal justice system, out of all other institutions, the schools and obviously the churches, we kind of control churches to a certain extent, but schools and the business community, you can almost deal with schools in the business community because you can build your own business, you can build your own school. I mean, so it's like we at fault for that, but to a certain extent. But the criminal justice system, we have no choice in that.
No, because it operates on its own set of obvious laws, and it will do those things that it does, regardless of any other thought or any other consideration. And so, regardless of what ultimately the result of a certain kind of decision, what the ultimate result is, the result is going to come, because that's what the criminal justice system does.
The wheels.
It's just what it does. And so without fundamentally changing how it operates, it will continue to do the same thing without fundamentally changing.
But it doesn't look good, because for 400 or 500 years, we have not been able to extricate. That philosophy has dominated the movements of this country through slavery, segregation, and now mass incarceration. In other words, out of those three groups, the group that's promoting equality and justice has been the weakest of the three.
Absolutely.
And we've been the weakest.
Absolutely.
We have not improved our strength in any way, shape, or form. The political power from 73 on has not translated into economic, social, or power within the criminal justice system.
It hasn't. And part that is, again, the direct result of us losing the middle 60s. The driving force was voting, right? Selma and all of that was about voting. It really was about voting. And the belief that my dad was born in 1902, right? My daddy's belief was that the way life will change fundamentally for black people was by the vote, by registering and voting. And for him, people like him, that was their basic belief. And they were right. What they didn't factor in, though, was the fact that their descendants, their children, would not buy into their belief to the same extent that they bought into it. That is, they would not register, they would not vote. And so we now operate in 2015 Louisiana, where where can we effectively change? Sure, we can change. Can we change those laws? Yes, we can change those laws by changing the people who make them. And how can you change the people who make them? Well, you elect them. And the fact of the matter is, the last governor election in Louisiana, only 22% of the people voted. Now you say, well, the gentleman was going to get elected anyway. You might be quite correct. But if 80% of black people ever voted in an election in Louisiana, you can determine who gets elected.
But let's go at that. We only have a couple of minutes, but political power, when the net worth of an African American female is minus $5. Is there such a thing as political power without economic power?
Yeah, but yes and no, I guess, is the answer to that one. Okay. Yes and no, because how can you get the economic power without having the political power? How can you demand change in this society without having some way to back up that demand? So if you say, well, we need economic power, we need some way to better control our own economic destiny, but how can we demand that without having something to back up that demand? And what is it that we have possibly to back up that demand, other than the democratic process, other than the vote? What is it that we have to back up that demand?
Well, but but this system, though, the continual privatization of prisons, unless, how much time, I mean, you've seen it from a good way, how much time we have left before, I mean, things are already about as wiped out as you can get. Obviously, it can get worse, but, you know, do we have 5 years, 10 years at this rate?
Wow. We are going to change, not because it's the right thing to do, because we can't afford to do it, continue to do it. We can't afford to continue putting people in parish prison because of the cost of it. We can't afford to continue keeping people incarcerated in Louisiana because of the cost of it. So the cost is going to drive the change. Whether ultimately we will end up with better result is another question entirely. But the cost will drive change, because some people believe in their money more than they believe in people. And so if it's costing me this much money, then I have to change because I don't want to lose my money. I don't give a crap what happens to the people.
Will the change be worse?
That's a good question. And the future will answer it for us. But unless we're going to do something proactively with the people who churns through the justice system, unless we're going to do things proactively or holistically with them, then we're still going to have issues. The issues won't change because of we saving money, but the issues won't change.
The power structures stay the same.
Exactly.
So if a person's not locked up, but he still needs to be dehumanized,
yeah,
that dehumanization may be worse than being locked up.
And if, again, unless we fundamentally change how we think.
Hey, this is Judge Calvin Johnson. We appreciate having him. Hey, you've heard it. I think we all know what we have to do, and that's fight as hard as we can. We appreciate you being a part. Continue to watch, but be vigilant, be strong, and don't flinch. Thank you.